Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to learn about external features of parotid gland. The parotid gland is the largest salivary gland. It is serous salivary gland. The parotid gland resembles an inverted pyramid. It presents the following features. It presents apex, base. Base is also known as superior surface. It presents three borders: anterior border, medial border, posterior border. It presents three surfaces: superficial surface or lateral surface, anteromedial surface, posteromedial surface. Now let's see about apex. It is directed downwards. It is overlapped by posterior belly of digastric muscle. The structures emerging through apex are cervical branch of facial nerve, anterior and posterior divisions of retromandibular vein. Cervical branch of facial nerve, anterior and posterior divisions of retromandibular vein. Base. It is also known as superior surface. It forms upper end. It is concave. The base is related to external acoustic meatus and posterior aspect of temporomandibular joint. The structures emerging through base are superficial temporal vessels and auriculotemporal nerve. This is auriculotemporal nerve. Now let's see about the surfaces. There are three surfaces: anteromedial surface, posteromedial surface, superficial surface or lateral surface. Anteromedial surface. It is deeply grooved by posterior border of ramus of mandible. This is ramus of mandible. This is posterior border of ramus of mandible. To the ramus of mandible, laterally, masseter is attached. Medially, medial pterygoid is attached. So the anteromedial surface is related to posterior border of ramus of mandible, masseter, medial pterygoid. Posteromedial surface. The posteromedial surface is molded onto mastoid process, styloid process and their covering muscles. Posteromedial surface is related to mastoid process. To the mastoid process, laterally, sternocleidomastoid is attached. Medially, posterior belly of digastric is attached. So the posteromedial surface is related to mastoid process with sternocleidomastoid and posterior belly of digastric. The posteromedial surface is also related to styloid process and styloid group of muscles. The styloid group of muscles include styloglossus, stylopharyngeus, and stylohyoid. The styloid process and the styloid group of muscles separates the gland from internal carotid artery, internal jugular vein, and large four cranial nerves. The styloid process and their group of muscles separates the gland from internal carotid artery, internal jugular vein, and large four cranial nerves, 9, 10, 11, 12 cranial nerves. The structures entering the gland through the posteromedial surface include facial nerve and external carotid artery. The facial nerve enters the gland through the upper part of posteromedial surface and the external carotid artery enters the gland through lower part of posteromedial surface. Next, superficial surface or lateral surface. The superficial surface or lateral surface is the largest surface. It is covered from superficial to deep by skin, superficial fascia, superficial lamina of parotid capsule, and deep parotid lymph nodes embedded within the gland. Skin. First, you are able to see the skin. Next, there is superficial fascia. The superficial fascia contains platysma. You can see here the muscle fibers of platysma, Superficial parotid lymph nodes, superficial parotid lymph nodes, anterior branches of greater auricular nerve, anterior branches of greater auricular nerve. The superficial parotid lymph nodes are also known as preauricular lymph nodes. The superficial parotid lymph nodes are present within the superficial fascia. Next to the superficial fascia, there is superficial lamina of parotid capsule. Superficial lamina of parotid capsule. Parotid capsule has superficial lamina, deep lamina. Deep to the superficial lamina of the parotid capsule, there are deep parotid lymph nodes embedded within the gland. Now let's see about the borders. There are three borders: anterior border, medial border, posterior border. The medial border separates anteromedial surface from posteromedial surface. The medial border is related to lateral wall of pharynx. Anterior border, it separates anteromedial surface from superficial surface. The structures emerging through anterior border from above downwards include temporal branch, transverse facial artery, and next to the transverse facial artery there is zygomatic branch, upper buccal branch. Below the upper buccal branch there is parotid duct. Next, lower buccal. Next, marginal mandibular branch. So the structures emerging through the anterior border from above downwards include temporal branch of facial nerve, transverse facial artery, zygomatic branch, upper buccal branch, parotid duct, lower buccal branch, marginal mandibular branch. Posterior border. It separates the posteromedial surface from the superficial surface. The structures related to the posterior border are posterior auricular vessels and posterior auricular nerve. Posterior auricular vessels and nerve. Let's summarize the external features. The parotid gland resembles an inverted pyramid. It presents the following features. It presents apex, base, also known as superior surface. It presents three borders: anterior border, medial border, posterior border. Three surfaces: anteromedial surface, posteromedial surface, superficial surface or lateral surface. Apex, it is directed downwards. It is overlapped by posterior belly of digastric. It is related to cervical branch of facial nerve, anterior and posterior divisions of retromandibular vein. Base, it is directed upwards. It is concave. It is also known as superior surface. It is related to external acoustic meatus and posterior aspect of temporomandibular joint. The structures emerging through base are superficial temporal vessels and auriculotemporal nerve. Three borders: anterior border. The structures emerging through anterior border from above downwards include temporal branch of facial nerve, transverse facial artery, zygomatic branch of facial nerve, upper buccal, parotid duct, lower buccal, and marginal mandibular branch. Medial border, it is related to pharynx. Posterior border, it is related to posterior auricular nerve and posterior auricular vessels. Three surfaces: anteromedial surface, it is deeply grooved by posterior border of ramus of mandible. It is related to posterior border of ramus of mandible, medial pterygoid, and masseter. Posterior medial surface, it is molded onto mastoid process, styloid process, and their covering muscles. It is related to mastoid process, sternocleidomastoid, posterior belly of digastric, styloid process, and styloid group of muscles. Styloid process and their group of muscles separates the gland from internal carotid artery, internal jugular vein, and last four cranial nerves. Superficial or lateral surface is the largest surface. From outside to inside, it is covered by skin. Superficial fascia. Superficial fascia contains platysma, anterior branches of greater auricular nerve, superficial parotid lymph nodes. Next to the superficial fascia, there is superficial lamina of the parotid capsule. Deep to that, deep parotid lymph nodes are embedded within the gland.